this is the Provoked Prawn, and here I'm comparing the Corsair K100 Air with the Logitech G915. These are two low-profile flagship keyboards with a number of interesting design highlights that include dedicated macro keys, media playback buttons, both Bluetooth and wireless connectivity, and obviously a really nice aesthetic. These are ever so slightly different and yet comparable in terms of price and overall performance and the design of them. And also they have a similar setup roughly in terms of the switch setup. They're both tactile switches, for example. And if you stick around to the end of the video, you'll hear a sound test to compare the switches as I talk a bit more about what I like and don't like about both of them and discuss the features. Now, obviously, I have recently unboxed and reviewed the K100 Air, and I've been using that for a while, and I usually use the G915 TKL as my mainstay keyboard, and so I'm pretty au fait with low-profile keyboards, and I really like them. I prefer them generally because my wrist sits lower and I feel a more comfortable typing experience. I also like the G915 TKL because it's fairly quiet. The Corsair K100 Air is the most low-profile keyboard I've seen. It sits incredibly low to the desk with really flush, low-profile switches and keycaps that you can see barely sit up from the keyboard itself. The result of this is pretty interesting as you have very little keycap wobble or movement, and that also is a low light because the keycaps are not meant to be removed, and so cleaning, I think, over long term will be difficult. However, they are comfortable to type on, although I will note they are pretty loud. Both keyboards have tactile switches, so they're not quiet particularly, but they do have quite a different setup. The G915, by comparison, sits a little bit higher, both in terms of the size of the body and the height of the keycaps. It's a very nice looking aesthetic. You'll see both of them when the shots are compared have this brushed aluminium finish to them and a really premium design and a very nice look. You also have a choice of switches with the G915. You have GL Tactile, GL Linear and GL Clicky, all of which actuate at 1.5 millimeters. And that's a point of interest because the key switches on the Corsair K100 are Cherry MX ultra low profile tactile switches, and they actuate at 0.8 millimeters. So they actually actuate at a very short distance with 1.8 millimeters of total travel versus 2.7 on the G915. This basically means that you only really need a very light press on the Corsair keyboard before the key switch activates and the key press is registered. So that's quite a significant difference. There's also quite a bit more wobble in the keycaps on the G915. However, I do like the typing experience, and also the choice of switches gives you a much more interesting setup in which one you choose and the results you get from it. I personally prefer the linears, for example, because they're quite a bit quieter and smoother for gaming. However, the K100 Air, as I mentioned in the review, is feature packed in that if you plug it in with a USB-C connection, you can get up to 8,000 Hz polling rate. The G915, by comparison, has a micro USB connection. You will notice that both of them have Bluetooth connectivity as well as their wireless dongles, so that's interesting. But you'll see when you look at the size difference that the G915 is larger side to side as well as sitting taller off the desk, and it is a bit taller top to bottom as well because of the placement of the buttons, and so it does take up a little bit more room on the desk, and I personally really don't like those macro buttons down the side. I think Corsair's layout with the K100, putting them in the top right out of the way, is a bit more preferable, but I suppose that's a personal opinion and a personal preference. You may well disagree. You can see the style of the K100 Air is a bit more stealthy. If you turn the RGB lighting off, it really makes a difference, and you can get up to 200 hours of battery life with the RGB off as well, or 50 with it on, which is pretty reasonable. I found I wasn't plugging it in that often, and it lasts longer than the G915 as well, because that has up to 30 hours battery life with 100% brightness. And you can see quite a bit of a design and style difference between the two, and some of these shots will really show off just how low profile the K100 is. Beyond the obvious differences, there are some other ones which aren't immediately obvious. The K100 Air, for example, has 50 onboard profiles and up to 20 layers of RGB lighting, which means that you can put RGB on top of each other or program keys individually with RGB. I think that the K100 Air, as a result, has a better RGB look and feel to it because it's more customizable and it has reactive lighting and all sorts. So it has a lot more lighting capabilities than the G915. That said, it's not the fanciest RGB keyboard I've seen. The K65 RGB Mini from Corsair is a much nicer looking one in terms of that. However, the lettering is well designed and well etched, so that when the RGB is turned off, you can still see the keycaps really easily as well. So that's a bonus. As I said, up to 8,000 Hz polling rate when plugged in, 1,000 Hz over wireless. You also have Bluetooth with 3 different connections that you can switch between using those G keys in the top right. So those G keys also work with Elgato software as well. And you'll notice there's a nifty little display at the top where the Corsair logo is, where you have a battery indicator, which will flash to let you know when you're running low. The G915 does have a little light on it too to let you know when you're running low on battery. So it's never really a problem, although it's easier to plug in the K100 thanks to that USB-C connection versus the one on the G915 with micro USB. So I think there's a bit more programmability. You can also record macros and reprogram keys in a lot more depth on the K100 as well. Now I'm going to do a sound test to show you the difference between the two. Be sure to check out the specs in the description for a comparison that way, and the link to the full review on the K100 Air to find out more about it. I really personally prefer the G915 TKL over either of these. However, there are obviously some significant differences in terms of the specs and the design, and so it's really going to be a personal choice, and there's a lot to be said for both of them. This has been the Provoked Prawn. Thanks for watching. This has been the Provoked Prawn. Hope you found this video useful, interesting, hilarious, or otherwise. Take a look at these other videos that I think you might find interesting as well. And have a look at the description for links and other information you might find useful. Click that join button to see the benefits of being a member of my YouTube channel. And most importantly, have a great life.